Imagine, if you will, the soft flicker of a lantern, its flame bending gently in a draught that whispers through the cracks of a wooden shutter. Beyond the narrow window, the streets of Constantinople lie hushed, their cobblestones dampened by the mist drifting in from the sea. The distant sound of water lapping against the harbor walls mingles with the faint creak of oars, a rhythm steady and slow, as if the very city breathes in its sleep. The watchtowers on the great Theodosian walls stand silently against the starlit sky, their outlines faintly visible in the glow of scattered torches. All else is still, the city wrapped in a blanket of calm. Inside a modest chamber, life is smaller, gentler. You are safe here. The plaster walls are warmed by the crackling of a small hearth. Shadows move lazily across them, cast by the dancing firelight. A narrow bed of straw and wool rests in one corner, while against another wall sits a simple desk, its surface worn smooth by years of steady work. A clay jug of water catches the glow of the lamp, and beside it rests a half-eaten loaf of coarse bread, forgotten after a long day. Here, in this quiet room, the weight of the empire feels far away. Listen closely, and you can almost hear it. The soft rustle of pages, the muted scratching of a quill across parchment, the faint sigh of a clerk who has grown used to the rhythm of his duties. It is not a life of grandeur, nor one of hardship. It is something in between, ordinary yet enduring. This is the world we step into tonight. The Byzantine clerk does not wield power like emperors, nor does he march to battle like soldiers. His life is steady, hidden in the margins of history. Yet it is his careful hands that record the lists, ledgers, and documents that keep the vast empire running. Without such work, the machinery of governance would falter. And so, day after day, he sits by the glow of lamplight, ink staining his fingers, writing line after line. There is a quiet beauty in this ordinariness. Every morning begins not with trumpets or processions, but with the pale light of dawn slipping through shutters. The air carries the scent of the sea, mingled with the smoke of hearth fires rising from neighboring chimneys. The city stirs gently. Awake, vendors arranging figs in baskets, fishermen hauling nets from the shore, children's voices echoing faintly in the courtyards. In the midst of this hum, the clerk ties his belt, takes up his writing tools, and begins the day. As the hours pass, he moves through a rhythm as steady as the tide. The scrape of quills in the office blends into a low chorus, as other clerks around him copy figures, tally records, and file documents into neat rolls. The sound is soothing, like rain on stone roofs. There is no hurry, no loud command, only the steady unfolding of work that has been done for centuries, and will be done for centuries more. Afternoons stretch in golden quiet. Light filters in through latticed windows, spilling across parchments stacked in careful piles. Dust motes drift lazily in the sunbeams, rising and falling with the faintest breath of air. Sometimes the clerk pauses, resting stiff fingers, sipping water, and gazing out at the courtyard where vines climb patiently along the walls. The stillness holds a kind of comfort, a reminder that life can be simple, even within the heart of a great empire. When dusk arrives, Constantinople takes on another mood. The streets glow faintly with torches, and the hum of the marketplace softens to a hush. From distant churches, bells toll slowly, their deep notes drifting over rooftops like waves rolling upon the sea. The clerk gathers his parchment, extinguishes his lamp, and returns home along narrow stone alleys. His footsteps echo quietly, mingling with the faint calls of neighbors bidding one another good night. At home, supper is modest stewed lentils, coarse bread, perhaps a small dish of pickled greens. Children grow drowsy as elders tell small stories, while the fire's glow fades to embers. It is not a feast, but it is enough. In these simple comforts lies a steady resilience, the quiet persistence that kept families alive through winters, taxes, and the endless flow of time. Later, when the city finally rests beneath the stars, the clerk lies upon his straw mattress, a woolen blanket pulled close. Outside, the sea continues its steady rhythm against the harbor walls. Cats slink silently along rooftops, watchmen make their rounds, and lanterns sway in the breeze. Within the chamber, however, all is still. The faint scent of ink lingers, and the last glow of embers paints the room in a warm, fading light. Sleep comes gently, carrying dreams of parchment, of ledgers, of sunlit courtyards, and quiet routines. And so, as you drift with him into this world, let go of urgency. There are no battles here, no weight of politics or power. There is only the soft toll of bells in the evening, the scratch of a quill in the morning, and the comfort of bread shared at a humble table. History often remembers the grand and the violent, but tonight we remember the ordinary. We remember the quiet resilience of those who lived unseen, their work forming the quiet backbone of an empire. So lie back now, close your eyes if you wish. Let the dim lantern light, the misty streets, the crackling hearth, and the steady rivers of Constantinople carry you into rest. For in the end, it is not the noise of history that lulls us to sleep, but it silences the forgotten, gentle lives that whisper softly through time, waiting to be remembered. Morning begins with a slow stirring of Constantinople, not with sudden noise or grand spectacle, but with a gentle awakening that feels as though the city itself breathes in rhythm with the sea that surrounds it, a rhythm old and familiar, a rhythm that has guided countless lives for generations. And in these early hours the streets are quiet, the stones cool with night air, still carrying the damp touch of mist that drifts inward from the Bosphorus. And the clerk, the figure we follow, does not rise to the sound of trumpets or to the clatter of soldiers' feet, but to something softer, something woven into the ordinary fabric of daily life, the faint toll of a distant church bell and the slow, broken crow of roosters hidden within courtyards, a sound neither dramatic nor loud, but steady, marking the hour when darkness slowly gives way to light, and he stirs beneath his woolen blanket, rubbing sleep from his eyes, feeling the coolness of the chamber press gently upon his skin, the walls still holding shadows cast by the small hearth whose embers glow faintly. And he sits up, not rushing, for the day ahead requires no great haste, only patience, the patience of one who copies, records, and preserves the lifeblood of an empire, not through conquest or command, but through ink and careful lines upon parchment. And he moves to the basin, splashes his face with cold water drawn the night before, the chill shocking him awake, yet leaving a freshness that lingers. Then he pulls on his plain tunic, its fabric, simple, a little worn, yet dependable, tied with a cord at the waist, a garment not meant for display but for the quiet service of daily duty. And in this small act his morning begins, one among thousands of mornings, each much the same, each carrying the rhythm of survival and service. And as he prepares to step into the day, the city too begins to stir, though gently, almost reluctantly, as if the weight of centuries rests upon its tiled roofs and stone walls, as if the vastness of the empire wakes in fragments through small sounds, the creak of a door opening, the brush of twigs against stone as a woman sweeps a courtyard, the rattle of a clay pot lowered into a well, the clop of a mule shifting in its harness, each sound small, yet together forming the earliest music of morning. And beyond the city's heart, the walls stand, massive, ancient, patient, their towers still cloaked in the blue shadow of night, watching as the horizon brightens with the first touch of gold. And the guard who keeps his watch upon the battlements rubs tired eyes, sees the light spread across the water, sees the silhouettes of boats swaying gently in the harbor, hears the first cries of gulls as they wheel overhead, and knows that another day has begun, not a day of triumph, not a day that will be recorded in chronicles, but a day that resembles countless others, quiet, persistent, ordinary. And it is within this ordinariness that life truly unfolds. For the empire depends not only upon emperors and generals, but upon clerks and bakers, masons and sailors, mothers and children, each one rising to mornings just like this, each one shaping the continuity of a world that endures more by repetition than by glory. And so the clerk steps into the street, the stones cool beneath his sandals, the air still touched by sea salt, the sky soft with pale light, and he begins his walk through narrow alleys where shutters creak open one by one, where faint curls of smoke drift from chimneys, where the smell of baking bread begins to spread, promising sustenance for the hours ahead. And as he passes neighbors, nods are exchanged, not words, for speech is slow to come in the morning, replaced instead by gestures of familiarity, of quiet recognition. And as he continues, the city expands around him, opening itself little by little, market stalls being arranged, baskets of figs set down, jars of honey polished in the light, donkeys bearing loads of firewood guided by soft calls from their keepers, children running barefoot to fetch water, their laughter bouncing lightly against the walls, all of it blending into a hum that grows steadily, yet still carries gentleness, for the full weight of the day has not yet arrived, and soon he reaches the office where his work awaits, a modest building with wooden doors, worn smooth by many hands, its walls plain, its windows narrow, allowing only slivers of light to enter, and inside, desks are arranged in rows, parchments stacked neatly upon shelves, inkpots sealed with care, quills sharpened and ready, and here he joins others, clerks like himself, men whose names will not appear in chronicles, yet whose hands preserve the memory of every transaction, every tax, every list of supplies that keeps the empire whole. And as he sits, he feels again the familiarity of it all, the weight of the quill between his fingers, the scent of soot-based ink, the smooth surface of parchment stretched before him, and when at last he begins, dipping the quill, pressing its tip gently, drawing the first careful stroke, the sound is soft, a muted scratching that blends with the same sound from those around him, forming a rhythm steady, meditative, like rainfall upon stone roofs, a rhythm that fills the hall and carries through the hours, unbroken save for pauses to stretch stiff fingers, to sip from clay cups, to adjust lamps when shadows grow too heavy, and though to some it may seem monotonous, to him it carries a certain peace, a peace born of knowing that his task, though small, is part of something vast, that his lines, his letters, his careful figures will remain, stored in shelves, guiding decisions, shaping orders, forming the hidden spine of empire, and as the hours pass, light deepens, dust motes drift in beams that slip through the lattice windows, rising and falling with the faintest breath of air, and he pauses a moment, lifting his eyes from the page, gazing out into the courtyard where vines creep along stone walls, where a fountain gurgles softly, where a sparrow dips its beak into shallow water, and he breathes, stretching, letting the stillness settle into him before he returns to the page. And outside the city continues its rhythm, bells tolling the hour, merchants calling from stalls, neighbors exchanging quiet words, fishermen announcing their catch, blacksmiths striking iron with steady, echoing blows, children darting through alleys, their sandals clattering, and all of it blends into the steady hum of daily life. Not dramatic, not heroic, but enduring, the true measure of history, not in sudden events, but in countless days, such as this. And by the time the sun climbs high, shadows shortening, the air warmer, the city fully awake, the clerk remains at his desk, writing steadily, patiently, each line a thread in the vast fabric of the world around him, and though evening still lies far ahead, its calm conclusion already waits, for the rhythm of the day is known, and in that knowledge lies comfort, the comfort of repetition, of order, of continuity, the comfort of knowing that empires rest, not only on the shoulders of emperors, but also on the quiet work of clerks, who greet the dawn not with fanfare but with quills, ink, and patience, who carry the weight of ordinary mornings into history itself. And so the day unfolds, beginning with dawn over the city walls, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries still. Each sunrise a reminder that even in the grandest of cities, it is the most ordinary of lives that give shape to time itself. In the quiet interior of a modest Byzantine dwelling, where plastered walls show the marks of time and smoke has faintly darkened the beams above, the day begins not with fanfare or haste, but with the simple rhythms of ordinary survival, and it is here at the hearth, where embers still glow from the night before, that the shape of morning reveals itself, a ritual so plain and small that history often forgets it. Yet it was, in these moments, repeated endlessly across generations, that the strength of empires was quietly sustained, for before pens scratched across parchment, and before ledgers filled with numbers, there was the quiet act of eating, and for the clerk who rises with the first pale light filtering across the tiled roofs of Constantinople, the first duty of his body is not to record the empire's dealings but to steady his own with bread and olives, to soften thirst with watered wine, and to find in the warm shadows of the hearth a sense of grounding before the day's long work begins. And so we linger here, watching as he stirs the embers gently, coaxing back a fragile flame from the ash, feeling the faint heat push against the cool morning air, watching the glow reflect against clay pots and the edges of an iron spit left from last evening. Though no rich feast lingers now, only crumbs and the faint smell of smoke that has soaked into every surface, for this is no banquet hall but a humble space, one of countless chambers scattered behind narrow lanes and small courtyards where families share lives of quiet repetition. And the bread he takes up is coarse, darkened at the edges, baked yesterday by his wife, or perhaps bought from a neighbor who runs a small oven in the alley. The crust, stiff and resisting, the inside dense but still nourishing, and though it lacks the softness of fresh loaves pulled steaming from the bakery, it is food, and it is enough, and beside it lies a bowl of olives, wrinkled, black, and shining, with the memory of brine, a taste at once sharp and grounding. 4 olives were not luxury here, but daily fare, a fruit of the land turned into sustenance that bound generations together, and with them, a jug of watered wine. 4 strong wine in the morning would be too heavy, yet thinned with cool water, it becomes a gentle companion, easing the rough edge of bread and filling the stomach with a comfort that plain water alone might not give. And so he eats slowly, without haste, for mornings are not meant to be rushed, and as he chews the hard crust, he looks about the small room, seeing how the light now falls across the hearth, how the dust drifts lazily in the beams, how the faint noise of the city beyond these walls begins to rise a distant cartwheel against stone, the call of a woman sweeping her steps, the muted bark of a dog greeting the dawn. And in these tiny sounds he knows the city is alive, though in his chamber all is still measured and calm. For Constantinople does not roar awake, but stirs gradually like a great body stretching after rest. And within each household, life begins, as simply as his, with bread, with olives, with the familiar taste of wine softened by water. And while emperors may be remembered for decrees and generals for victories, it is this kind of beginning that made possible the labor of every day. For no empire stands without the countless meals that fill ordinary bellies, and so we should not rush past this table but pause with him, sharing the quiet, noticing how the rough wooden surface of the table bears marks of knives, how a clay cup shows a small chip along its rim, how the smell of smoke mingles with the faint salt of olives, and how, in this little meal, there is a strange beauty in ordinary, for it ties him not only to his neighbors who eat the same, but to ancestors who once sat at hearths, centuries before, breaking bread in the same way, and to descendants who would yet do the same. And so time folds gently in the act of eating, and while the bread may be dry, dipped into the wine it softens, becoming easier to chew, releasing a flavor both sour and warm. And the clerk does not complain, for he expects no more than this, and in truth he finds a certain comfort in its sameness, for in a world that often trembles with uncertainty, whether from distant wars, shifting taxes, or rumors whispered in markets, there is peace in knowing that breakfast will be the same today as it was yesterday and likely tomorrow. And in that repetition lies a form of resilience, a quiet strength, that sustains not only him but the empire built on the backs of countless clerks, bakers, farmers, and fishermen whose lives rarely reach the pages of chronicles, yet without whom those chronicles could not have been written. And perhaps this is why the hearth feels so sacred, not because it is grand, but because it is constant, and the glow of embers speaks of survival, of yesterday's fire carrying forward into today, of warmth preserved through the night, of human persistence against the cool breath of dawn. And as he finishes his meal he wipes his fingers against a cloth that hangs by the hearth, its edges frayed from long use, and he hears outside the faint murmur of neighbors gathering in the courtyard, their greetings soft, unhurried, for morning. Conversations are not hurried transactions, but gentle acknowledgments of shared life, and he may step out soon to nod back, to trade a word about the weather, to share news of a child or a relative. And though such words vanish quickly into the air, they weave a web of belonging, and in that belonging he finds strength enough to carry his ledger, to dip his pen, to count, and to record, for though his work seems dry, it rests on the same foundation as his breakfast. Small things repeated, quiet acts that build something greater than themselves. And as the sun creeps higher, casting golden light across the tiled roofs, the city awakens more fully, voices gathering in strength, footsteps sounding against stone, shutters opening to let in the day, and he knows it is time to begin his own. But we linger here a little longer, letting the warmth of the hearth soften the edges of thought, letting the taste of bread and olives linger on the tongue, letting the quiet rhythm of morning settle deeply. For there is a kind of wisdom in not rushing forward, but allowing the ordinary to be enough. And so we remain, eyes half closed, listening to the hum of life beyond these plaster walls, feeling how history itself rests not on moments of drama, but on mornings like these, when a clerk, unnoticed, eats a simple meal before beginning another day. The clerk steps out from the dim protective stillness of his chamber into the awakening city, and at once the shift is clear. The intimacy of the hearth gives way to the openness of streets, where stone carries sound and light in ways both sharp and soft. The air, still cool from the night, brushes against his face, carrying with it the mingled sense of a place where countless households converge in the simple act of beginning another day. He pulls his cloak about his shoulders, more out of habit than necessity, and begins the familiar walk from home to office. A journey not long yet always full of detail, for the city itself seems to breathe along these paths, and in its breath he senses his own small place within its vast body. The lanes he takes are narrow, winding between rows of modest dwellings. Their plastered walls, patched again and again by careful hands, show signs of age, but also resilience. In some places, the whitewash flakes away, revealing the rough stone. Beneath, an ivy creeps cautiously across a few corners, softening the harsh lines with a touch of green. The pavement beneath his sandals is uneven, made of stones worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Some are loose, wobbling slightly under pressure, and the clerk must watch where he treads to avoid stumbling. Yet there is comfort in this unevenness, for it is the mark of lives lived before him, each footprint slowly shaping the stones into their current form. Already the sounds of vendors drift into the air. At first, they are tentative, as though voices too must warm themselves against the morning, but soon they grow louder, overlapping in a patchwork of calls. A woman with baskets of figs arranges them carefully, choosing the ripest for display, their skins glossy and deep purple, hinting at the sweetness within. She greets him with a nod, her hands never still, and he nods in return, though he does not stop to buy. A few paces further, mats woven from reeds are being unfurled, spread across the ground to reveal intricate patterns of color reds, browns, and muted yellows interlacing in quiet harmony. The weaver crouches, patting down the edges so that no corner curls upward, her fingers quick and certain. Nearby, a man lifts clay pots from a donkey's pack, setting them down with a hollow ring, lining them in neat rows that gleam faintly in the new light. Each vendor marks the street with a fragment of human craft, turning the stones into a living market. The air is thick with mingled scents. Smoke drifts lazily from hearths and ovens, curling into the sky in pale ribbons. There is the sharp salt of seaweed carried inland from the harbor, where waves slap against stone piers, and cutting through both comes the smell of bread fresh, hot loaves pulled from communal ovens. It is a smell that belongs not to one household but to many, for ovens serve whole neighborhoods, and as he passes, the clerk sees men and women waiting with baskets, cloths ready to wrap around the warm bread they will carry home. The oven's keeper, with arms darkened by years of soot and heat, slides loaves carefully from the mouth of fire, each one exhaling a fragrance that makes the morning richer. The streets are not quiet, though they are not yet crowded either. Donkeys pass, with wicker baskets slung across their flanks, the steady clop of hooves striking the stone in patient rhythm. Sometimes the baskets hold vegetables pulled fresh from the gardens outside the city, onions still clinging to soil, lettuces dark and crisp, or bundles of herbs tied with twine. Other times the baskets carry goods less perishable, wool spun into yarn, blocks of beeswax, or jugs of oil sealed with clay. The animals move slowly, guided by boys who prod them gently with sticks, calling out warnings as they squeeze through the narrower lanes. Children add another layer to the morning's texture. Their laughter rings bright against the stone walls as they chase one another around fountains or dart between pillars in courtyards. Some play games with stones, drawing marks in the dust, while others splash water upon their hands and faces, shaking it off in gleeful bursts. Their energy contrasts with the measured pace of adults, yet no one seems to mind, for their noise is woven naturally into the fabric of morning. A reminder that the city is young as well as old. Everywhere, sound echoes differently in these narrow spaces. A call from one end of the alley seems to linger longer than expected, bouncing from wall to wall. The creak of a cart's wheel seems amplified, its wooden groan stretching down the passage until it fades. Even footsteps seem more present here, sandal against stone producing a faint slap that carries farther than it would in open ground. To walk these streets is not to move in silence, but to be immersed in a low, constant hum that speaks of countless lives moving in synchrony. The clerk walks steadily, his eyes sometimes drawn upward to the strip of sky visible between rooftops. It is narrow, often broken by wooden balconies jutting outward, or by awnings stretched across shops. Laundry already hangs in some places, fluttering faintly in the breeze. Tunics, cloaks, small garments of children, all testifying to the hidden domestic worlds behind these walls. Pigeons perch on ledges, cooing softly, while occasionally a sudden flutter of wings breaks the calm as a bird darts across the sky. From time to time, he passes a shrine tucked into a corner, a small niche carved into stone where a painted icon rests behind a pane of glass. Candles, melted down to stubs, lean against one another, their wax pooled thick at the base. A faint scent of incense lingers even when no flame burns, and the clerk, like many passers-by, pauses briefly to bow his head, touching his fingers to his brow before moving on. Such shrines are ordinary, yet they bind the sacred to the mundane, reminding him that even this walk to the office passes through holy ground. His thoughts, meanwhile, drift as naturally as his steps. The routine of walking through these streets allows his mind to wander, to consider the tasks awaiting him in the office, to recall a conversation from the previous evening, to imagine how the day might unfold. Yet the city always pulls him back, demanding attention with its endless small details. A cat darts across his path, carrying something in its mouth. A door opens suddenly, releasing the smell of cooking lentils. A beggar calls softly from a shaded corner, hand extended, eyes weary. Each moment interrupts thought, grounding him once more in the living texture of his surroundings. At a small fountain, he pauses to wash his hands, the cool water flowing from a spout carved in the shape of a lion's head. The stone is damp, worn smooth by many such touches. Children giggle as they splash nearby, and an old man fills a jug slowly, tilting it just right so the water does not spill. For a brief moment, all stand together, sharing the gift of water that the city, through its aqueducts and cisterns, delivers faithfully each day. Then, as quickly as it gathered, the little company disperses, each returning to their own path. As the clerk resumes his walk, the streets begin to grow busier. Artisans open shutters, bringing tools into the light. The hammering of a smith begins to ring from one corner, iron striking iron in steady rhythm. From another comes the rasp of a saw as wood is cut, the smell of shavings drifting outward. Women sit before doorways, spinning wool, their fingers deft, their conversations low and steady. Everywhere, life spills outward from homes and workshops into the public lanes, so that the street itself becomes both passage and dwelling. The clerk, however, does not rush. He has walked this path so many times that he knows precisely how long it will take, and the city's slow unfolding seems to set the rhythm of his own steps. He finds comfort in this measured pace, in knowing that he moves as part of a larger flow, neither hurrying ahead nor lagging behind. The streets, with their stones and scents and sounds, hold him within their embrace, guiding him steadily toward his duty. And as he nears the broader avenue that will lead to his office, he looks once more at the life around him, the figs gleaming in their baskets, the clay pots stacked in quiet pride, the donkeys patient beneath their loads, the children laughing beside fountains, the smoke rising from chimneys and ovens, the pigeons shifting on ledges, the shrine with its faint trace of incense. And he feels, for a moment, that all of it together forms a single vast harmony, a music of ordinary life, played daily upon the stones of the city. It is not grand, not meant to be remembered in chronicles, but it is the foundation upon which everything else rests, the living heartbeat of Constantinople itself. And so he walks on, one man among many, footsteps echoing softly in the narrow alleys, carrying him forward into another day. The office itself is not grand, but functional, its walls built of thick stone that holds the coolness of night even as the morning sun begins to climb. And within this space the air feels hushed, as if the building itself has grown accustomed to the slow, steady rhythm of clerks who have labored here for generations, men whose names are mostly forgotten but whose hands once guided the same kind of quills, whose eyes once adjusted to the same dim flicker of oil lamps, whose ears once tuned to the same soft chorus of scratching on parchment, all of it weaving together into a continuous tapestry of labor that seems timeless, patient, and unbroken. And the clerk, stepping inside, becomes another link in this chain, neither remarkable nor invisible, but simply necessary. As necessary as the walls that hold the shelves, or the ink that fills the pots upon the desks. And so he sets himself to the rhythm, breathing it in as though it were a tide that comes and goes without fail. For this is not work of drama but of endurance, and it is endurance that sustains an empire as much as swords or ships, though rarely sung in song or etched in stone. He moves across the worn floorboards that creak under the weight of many steps, toward his place at a long wooden desk already marked with scratches, ink stains, and the faint grooves of earlier quills, each line a trace of hours spent in patient repetition. And here he settles, placing his small bundle, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a small flask of water beside him for later, and then he adjusts his stool so that his body falls into familiar posture, one that will remain for hours, shoulders bent, hands steady, eyes lowering to parchment, and with this, the day's work begins. The shelves around the hall rise tall and uneven, filled with parchment rolls, tied neatly with cords, some brittle with age, some fresher, all carrying the lifeblood of the administration, the words that make empires run, not with noise but with order, and though they hold no shine of jewels nor fragrance of spices, their worth is in the certainty they provide, the assurance that matters have been noted, sealed, stored, and recalled when needed, and in that order lies the strength of emperors. Lamps burn low on brackets, their light competing with the faint shafts of daylight that slip through narrow slits in the wall. But the light is never enough, and so the hall seems always in twilight, not dark enough for night, not bright enough for full day, a grayness that calms the senses and quiets the mind into its work. And in this half-light the clerks settle in, each in silence, though not the silence of isolation, rather the quiet harmony of men who share a single purpose, each quill dipping, scratching, lifting, dipping again, like rainfall against leaves, steady, soft, unhurried, a rhythm that sinks into the body until one ceases to hear it at all, becoming instead a pulse beneath thought, a companion sound to breathing itself. Here the work is both simple and endless. Lists of taxes, records of births, inventories of grain, accounts of soldiers, decrees of officials, small petitions copied with care, each line a stone in the vast unseen foundation of empire, each stroke of the quill preserving continuity where otherwise there would be only confusion. And though no passerby in the city beyond would stop to think of it, here in this modest hall the empire holds itself together, not through spectacle but through attention, through the slow gathering of countless details into one order. Time in this space moves differently, measured not by bells or sun, but by the filling of pages, the drying of ink, the completion of one bundle, then the reaching for another, and in this rhythm hours fold into each other, steady as waves rolling, to a shore, and as the morning extends, the clerk feels himself sinking into it, his own individuality softening into the collective labor of the whole, where his hand joins many hands, his breath joins many breaths, and together they form a single, quiet body that sustains the empire with nothing more than patience and repetition. And yet, within this calm, there are small details that catch the senses. The faint smell of wax melting from the lamps, mingled with the sharp attempts of ink. The scratchy feel of parchment beneath fingertips, rougher in some places, smoother in others. The occasional cough or clearing of the throat that breaks the rhythm like a pebble dropped into a stream. The shuffle of sandals against stone as someone rises to fetch a roll from the shelf. The whisper of a cord being untied. The sigh of someone stretching stiff shoulders before returning again to the endless lines. And all of this folds back into the stillness, becoming part of the greater hum that never truly stops. The clerk, though young, already feels the weight of habit in his bones. For this work is not one of constant novelty, but of repetition, and it is in repetition that one learns endurance, and in endurance that one finds meaning, however quiet. And so he continues, quill gliding, ink marking, words forming, until the parchment grows filled with the shapes of language, steady rows that will be tied, stored, and perhaps consulted long after his hand is gone, his name forgotten, but his trace preserved in ink that does not carry identity, yet carries purpose all the same. It is this quiet immortality that belongs to clerks, not remembered faces, not celebrated deeds, but the persistence of the records they left, the silent continuity of lines that stretch forward, binding past to present, present to future, each word a bridge, unseen but walked upon all the same. And so the office hall becomes more than a building. It becomes a vessel of memory, a place where the fragile act of writing safeguards the vast body of empire. And within it the clerks find themselves both small and essential. Their labor humble, but their labor endless. And in that endlessness, there is a strange peace, the kind that comes when one knows his task is not to be finished in a day, nor even in a lifetime, but simply to be carried, faithfully, as long as he draws breath, until another hand, another quill, takes his place at the desk, and the rhythm continues, as it always has, as it always will. A quill trimmed carefully, its tip carved with practiced precision, a pot of soot-based ink that catches faint glimmers of lamplight, a sheet of smooth parchment stretched taut upon a wooden desk. These are his companions, constant and dependable, each with its own character, each demanding its own attentiveness, each carrying a kind of silent dialogue with the hand that wields it. And as the clerk begins his work, he knows that these tools, though simple in appearance, are the heart of his craft, for without them the empire itself would falter into forgetfulness. The quill, drawn from the feather of a goose or swan, is light, yet firm, and though to the untrained eye it is but a feather's remnant, to the hand that has shaped it, cut it, trimmed it, and tested its point against scrap, it becomes an instrument of remarkable precision, capable of both the finest delicate strokes and the broadest sweeping lines, its flexibility mirroring the movement of the wrist, its sharpness demanding care. For too much pressure and it splinters, too little and the ink falters, and so each quill holds within it a discipline, a reminder that mastery is not in force but in balance. The ink, thick and dark, is born from soot and water, sometimes bound with gum, a mixture both fragile and enduring, for while it flows easily from quill to parchment, it clings stubbornly to the fibers of the page, darkening into permanence, its scent faintly acrid, a temp that lingers on the fingertips and stains the cuticles of nails. And though no one praises ink itself, the clerk knows its power. For a single drop misplaced may mar a page, a single line written carelessly may alter meaning, and yet when guided with care, it becomes the breath of law, the voice of decrees, the steady pulse of order. The parchment, stretched and smoothed from the skin of sheep or goat, is itself a marvel of labor, for its creation required scraping, soaking, drying, sanding, and polishing, each stage transforming rawhide into a surface upon which history may rest, and the clerk, running his hand gently across it before writing, feels both respect and gratitude, for he knows the cost of such a sheet, the value it carries, and the rarity it represents. And so he works with care, not out of fear, but out of reverence, for parchment is no common thing to be wasted. It is, in its way, as sacred as stone upon which temples are carved, for it holds the memory of people and rulers alike. Mistakes, then, are rare not merely because of skill, but because of necessity. For to err upon parchment is to waste not just material but also labor, to squander what has been dearly prepared. And so the clerk trains his hand, his eye, his patience, so that his script flows without falter, steady and sure, each curve of letter formed not in haste but in measured rhythm, and thus each page, each line, carries both beauty and function. For script is not decoration alone but the vessel of meaning. And yet, when neat and steady, it transcends utility, becoming something more, something quietly beautiful, a balance of clarity and grace. To outsiders, this work may appear dull, for what excitement lies in dipping quill to ink and drawing lines upon a page, hour after hour, day after day. But for the clerk, there is a quiet pride in this discipline, in the knowledge that what he inscribes will endure beyond his flesh, that the lines he writes, simple though they may seem, will outlast him, will carry the voices of officials and rulers into years he will never see, will become references for disputes long after his hand has stilled, and in this endurance there is dignity, a kind of immortality granted not to his name but to his labor, and for him, that is enough. The tools themselves become extensions of his body, the quill like an extra finger through which thought flows into form, the ink like blood that animates the page, the parchment like skin upon which life is etched, and in this union there is intimacy, for the tools are not passive but responsive, demanding respect, rewarding care, punishing negligence. And so the clerk, though seated in silence, engaged in no grand deeds, lives a life of constant dialogue with the objects before him, a dialogue that shapes both the words he writes and the patience with which he writes them. Over time, he comes to sense subtle differences, how one quill bends more gently, how another is sharper and quicker, how one batch of ink dries faster, how another bleeds if pressed too firmly, how some parchment resists the quill, while others embrace it smoothly. And in learning these distinctions, he learns not merely his craft but also humility, for no tool is perfect, no material without flaw, and it is not mastery to eliminate imperfection but to work with it, to guide it, to fold it into the rhythm of creation, so that the finished page is not flawless but harmonious. There is, too, ritual in the preparation, the trimming of the quill each morning with a small knife, the careful stirring of ink lest it thicken overnight, the stacking of parchment in readiness, the testing of the quill's point upon a scrap, the wiping of the desk to clear away dust, each act small yet purposeful, grounding the clerk in his craft, reminding him that order begins not with words but with readiness, and readiness is itself a discipline, as steadying to the spirit as it is useful to the hand. In the long hours, when the scratching of quills fills the hall like soft rain upon a roof, these tools are companions, their presence constant, their demands familiar, and though they do not speak, they teach. The quill teaches precision, the ink teaches patience, the parchment teaches respect, and together they shape the clerk not only into a recorder of empire, but into a man attuned to care, discipline, and endurance. And so, as the day stretches onward, he continues, his hand moving steadily, his tools guiding him as much as he guides them, his lines forming not only records, but also the subtle beauty of neatness, clarity, and grace. And though no passerby may see this, though no crowd may cheer it, though no monument may bear his name, he knows within himself that what he creates with these humble instruments will outlast the moment, the year, even his own life, and in that knowledge he finds quiet pride, for he understands that permanence is not always carved in stone nor sung in halls, but sometimes rests in ink, in parchment, in the steady hand of one who writes with care. The day moves slowly in Constantinople, and as the sun begins to climb higher into the pale blue sky, there comes a time when the steady rhythm of scratching quills and the quiet shuffle of parchment must give way to something gentler, something softer, something as human as hunger and as natural as the passing of hours. And in the small office hall where our clerk has spent his morning bending over parchment rolls, the air grows warmer, the light shifts with subtle changes of shadow through the narrow lattice windows, and the clerks one by one begin to pause in their steady movements, laying quills down carefully so that the sharp nibs do not break, sealing inkpots so that the liquid does not thicken or spill, and stretching stiff hands that ache from the repetitive yet meditative labor of writing line after line. And in this pause there is no ceremony, no official signal, only the shared understanding that midday has come, a natural agreement written into the routine of those who serve the empire through quiet acts of preservation. And so, on benches pulled close or upon the cool stone floor where a patch of light may fall, the clerks gather their modest meals, each bundle carried from home in cloth wrappings or wooden bowls, and they begin to eat in silence that is not empty but comfortable, filled with the small sounds of spoons against bowls, the gentle tearing of bread, the pouring of oil to soften what is hard, the chewing of cheese that is simple, slightly salty, nourishing but never luxurious. And with these movements there rises a subtle fragrance of olives, nuts, and bread still rough from the communal ovens, mingling with the lingering scent of parchment and ink that clings to their fingertips. And in this blending of smells, the human side of empire is revealed. For here in the pause of midday there is no emperor, no general, no senator, only men with modest appetites taking comfort in the same sustenance that fed generations before them and will feed generations after. And while they eat, conversation drifts not in loud bursts but in soft fragments, subdued and warm, flowing slowly like the Bosphorus itself, carrying talk of weather that shifts the sails in the harbor, of prices in the markets where wives and mothers haggle for olives and figs, of the health of a child who coughed the night before, of the rising cost of wood to burn in winter hearths, of the absent neighbor who has gone to serve in another quarter of the city. And these conversations, though small, hold the weight of life's continuity, for they are reminders that history is not written only in grand decrees, but in the quiet exchange of daily concerns spoken over bread and cheese. And as they share these words, the sunlight continues to move across the floor, shifting from the cool dimness of morning toward a harsher brightness, softened only by the narrow latticework that filters the beams into patterned shadows, and in those shadows dust motes dance slowly, visible only when the light strikes them directly, moving as if to remind those gathered that time itself drifts on even in silence, and the clerks watch, not consciously, but with the peripheral sense of men accustomed to stillness, and they eat without hurry, without urgency, for the work waits but does not demand, and the empire itself rests upon such pauses as much as upon the work that frames them, because men cannot labor endlessly without the grounding of simple meals and shared voices. And so this interlude is as essential as the ink upon parchment, a moment of humanity in the endless chain of record-keeping. And while some clerks lean back, eyes closed for a brief rest, others finish their food with quiet satisfaction, licking a fingertip to gather crumbs, wiping their hands upon cloth, setting bowls aside with care, and still others linger, nibbling slowly, stretching the moment as if to lengthen the calm before the quills must once again scratch across the surface of parchment. And outside, faint sounds drift in through the stone walls, the distant call of a street vendor hawking figs, the bray of a donkey pulling its cart, the laughter of children chasing one another in a courtyard, the steady toll of a bell from a nearby church marking the hour, and these sounds mingle with the stillness inside, reminding the clerks that though they sit in quiet, the city beyond is alive, layered, filled with movements that mirror their own in rhythm though not in duty. And perhaps in such awareness they feel a kind of grounding, a reminder that their small roles are threads within the larger tapestry, unremarkable yet essential, unnoticed, yet enduring, and the midday pause deepens this sense, for it is here in the eating and the quiet talk that they feel themselves as men among men, rather than mere extensions of parchment and ink. And it is here that bonds are strengthened subtly, not with declarations of friendship, but with the steady repetition of shared bread, the nod of recognition, the listening ear when a colleague mentions his mother's illness or his worry about the year's harvest. And though none of these words are recorded, though they leave no mark upon the scrolls that line the shelves, they are no less important, for they weave the unseen fabric of companionship that sustains laborers of the mind. And as the food dwindles, as the bowls empty and the crusts are consumed, the pause begins to fade, not abruptly, but with the slow winding down of a gentle tide, and one by one the clerks shift, gather their cloth wrappings, wipe away crumbs, drink the last sip of watered wine, and glance toward the desks where quills wait. And though none hurry, the sense of return is inevitable, a soft pullback into the current of duty, and yet for a few lingering breaths, the warmth of shared presence lingers, like the glow of embers after a flame, and in that lingering warmth lies the quiet truth that sustains not only clerks but all who labor in silence, that even the smallest pause, the simplest meal, the most ordinary conversation can carry the weight of meaning, binding one day to the next, one man to another, one life to the endless flow of history. And so the midday pause ends, as all pauses must, gently and without ceremony, leaving behind crumbs, faint smells, and a memory of stillness before the scratching of quills begins again. In the hushed stillness of a chamber set slightly apart from the busier rooms of ledgers and accounts, where the scribes normally calculate the flow of taxes or transcribe decrees that bind merchants to their obligations, another kind of work unfolds, slower, more reverent, more delicate. For here some clerks are given the task of copying sermons, prayers, or passages of sacred instruction, and when they sit before their parchment, the atmosphere is different, touched with a weight that is not measured in coins or tallies, but in something harder to name. For each letter they draw carries not only the burden of accuracy, but the weight of faith itself, and so precision becomes devotion. The act of writing transformed into an offering, a small ritual in which every curve of ink mirrors an inward bow, every pause to sharpen the quill becomes a moment of quiet preparation, every glance at the source manuscript echoes an act of humility. And in this dim chamber the light is not the bright clarity of day, but the softer, wavering glow of candles, their flames trembling with the faint currents of air that sneak through the cracks in stone. And those flames burn steadily downward, their wax pooling at the base in slow glistening folds that mark the passage of time more gently than any clock or bell. while the smell of melted tallow mingles with the iron tang of ink, and the two together form a scent that clings to the air, both heavy and grounding, the smell of devotion made tangible. And if one listens closely, there are faint sounds that leak in from the world beyond these walls, the distant echoes of footsteps in a cloistered corridor, the muffled chanting of a nearby chapel where voices rise and fall in tones that do not intrude but hover at the edge of perception, like waves far off against a shore. And in this setting the clerk bends low, shoulders hunched, eyes narrowed in focus, the world narrowing until parchment and quill become the only horizon, a quiet stage where every stroke matters, and though the task is repetitive, though line follows line in a rhythm that might seem endless, the repetition itself becomes a prayer, a meditation, for the hand moves in steady strokes, guided not only by training but by intention, and the mind settles into the act as if surrendering, so that the act of copying is no longer separate from the act of believing. And though no audience witnesses these labors, though the pages will be bound and read by others far away, the moment of creation belongs wholly to the scribe, a silent offering of faith carved into the fibers of parchment. And sometimes a clerk pauses, leaning back slightly to ease the stiffness of his wrist or the ache of his shoulders, and in that pause he watches the candle flame tremble, or he listens to the faint cadence of distant chants, and he feels, without needing to name it, that his small role connects him to something larger, something that stretches across generations. For others before him have bent over manuscripts in this same posture, and others after will do the same, continuing an unbroken chain of devotion made visible in ink. And though the words may be sermons written by preachers long gone, or prayers whispered by countless lips already turned to dust, still the act of copying makes them present again, as if every letter formed calls the voice of the past into the present. And so the scribe serves as a bridge, a vessel through which words travel across time, and though he may not speak them aloud, though his lips remain pressed together in silence, his hand gives them form once more, preserving them for those yet to come. And this awareness, even if felt only faintly, deepens the labor, making each stroke of the quill not merely mechanical but sacramental, a merging of duty and faith, of discipline and devotion. And if one were to stand in that room and watch, one would notice the rhythm of movement, the dipping of the quill into ink, the lifting of eyes toward the source text, the slow tracing of letters across parchment, the occasional blowing upon the ink to help it dry before the page is turned, the careful straightening of lines to avoid unevenness, the sharpening of the quill with a small knife when its tip grows dull, each motion repeated countless times, each one performed with patient attention. And surrounding all this is the stillness of the room itself, a stillness broken only by the scratch of quill against skin, the faint drip of wax from candle to stone, the distant echo of chants through corridors. And in that stillness the work expands, stretching hours into what feels like timelessness, for the scribe, in his absorption, loses awareness of how many minutes pass, how many lines have been written, how many pages remain, and what is left instead is the immersion itself. The simple truth that in this moment he is a servant not only of his master or his institution but of something higher, and though his knees may ache, though his eyes may blur, though his hand may cramp with the repetition, he continues, because each letter matters, each word matters, each page matters, and to falter, to rush, to err, would be to diminish not only the manuscript but the reverence it deserves. And so he perseveres, and in doing so he discovers a kind of peace, not the peace of rest, but the peace of focus, of total presence, of being fully within a single act without distraction. And so the work of copying sacred texts becomes something greater than transcription. It becomes a practice, a discipline, a form of devotion in which the sacred enters not only the page but the body of the scribe himself, shaping him as much as the ink shapes the parchment. And when at last the candle burns low, when the wick trembles on the edge of extinguishing, when the wax is pooled in thick rivers hardened against stone, the clerk will lift his head, stretch his cramped fingers, and look at the page he has completed, and in that moment he may feel, however quietly, a sense of fulfillment, knowing that he has preserved something precious, not for himself alone but for all who will one day read these words. And that sense is its own prayer, silent, steady, enduring, like the steady strokes of his quill across the silent page. when the air grows heavy in the rooms where parchment, ink, and ledgers keep the clerks bent over their long tasks. There comes a natural pause, not hurried, not loudly spoken, but simply felt, like the slowing of breath after a long walk. And in these pauses some clerks rise from their benches and step out into the courtyard, where the world shifts in tone and texture. For beyond the narrow windows and stone thresholds lies a space touched not by the scratch of quills but by sunlight and air, and in that courtyard vines creep patiently along the worn stone walls, their green tendrils weaving a quiet tapestry across surfaces that have stood for centuries, their leaves trembling slightly in whatever breeze stirs through, as if nature itself wished to offer movement to the still stone. And at the center of this space stands a fountain, its water flowing in steady arcs, gathering birds that flutter down to drink or to bathe, their feathers catching the light in brief flashes of color. And as they move, the fountain seems less like stone and more like a stage for life itself, the gentle splash of water mingling with the softer rustle of wings. And above it all, the sky stretches open, unframed by the ceilings of the workrooms, a reminder that beyond ink and parchment there is vastness, there is change, there is something more fluid than the lines they copy each day. And the sunlight that pours into this courtyard does not strike with the harshness of noon, but softens into gold, the kind of gold that slides slowly across stone, painting long shadows that lengthen as the afternoon leans toward evening. And those shadows carve the ground into alternating patterns of light and dark, shifting as the breeze moves the vines, so that even stillness carries quiet motion. And from the edges of this courtyard come sounds that tether it to the world. Beyond the clerk's walls, the distant laughter of children, echoing faintly as they play in nearby lanes, their voices rising and falling like small bells, unmeasured, unbound, carrying with them a freedom that the clerks, in their discipline, seldom tastes but can feel through the echo. And mingled with that laughter are the calls of vendors outside the walls, their voices offering fruit, bread, cloth, each cry carrying the rhythm of trade, the pulse of the marketplace, the reminder that life moves not only in manuscripts but in exchanges of hands and voices. And all of this filters into the courtyard like distant music, weaving together with the murmur of water, the chirp of birds, the faint rustle of leaves, until the space itself feels like a chamber of gentle sound, neither loud nor silent, a balance where the clerk, stepping into it, can breathe more deeply, can feel the tightness in his shoulders ease, the ache in his fingers soften, the heaviness in his eyes lift, and as he inhales, the air tastes of stone warmed by the sun, of earth resting beneath the vines, a faint bread carried from nearby stalls, and he allows himself, for a moment, to simply be, to savor the ordinary beauty that surrounds him. For though it is ordinary, it is also rare in its quiet perfection, a reminder that not every gift comes with ceremony. Some come with sunlight slipping across stone, with laughter carried on a breeze, with shadows lengthening like patient hands stretching across the ground. And in these pauses the clerk finds renewal, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but subtle, steady, enough to carry him back to his tasks. And when at last he turns again, toward the door, stepping from gold light into the dimmer chambers where ink and parchment await, he carries with him the memory of vines, of birds at fountains, of laughter drifting beyond walls. And with that memory he sits once more, bends to his work, and continues calmly, his strokes steadier, his focus clearer, his heart quieter, as if the courtyard has lent him its stillness, its rhythm, its balance of sound and silence, of shadow and light. And so the cycle continues, day after day, season after season, the courtyard offering its golden afternoon light to all who pause within it, shaping their labor not with command, but with presence, not with instruction but with reminder that beyond the page there is life, and within that life there is beauty, simple, patient, enduring. Life in the city hums gently, not in sudden bursts but in a long, even thread of sound that seems always present, shaping the hours without demanding them. And for the clerk, whose ear bends toward the scratch of quill against parchment for so much of the day, these outer noises are never distractions but companions, weaving through his awareness like a quiet music, steady and familiar. For just beyond the walls and windows neighbors sweep their stoops with straw brooms, each stroke soft against stone, a rhythm that marks care more than necessity, lifting dust that settles again, and the sound of those brooms swishes in slow, patient arcs, as if they were strokes of another kind of pen writing across the street. And women carrying baskets of greens move with steady steps, their feet soft against the worn stones, the baskets balanced against hips or cradled in arms, leaves rustling faintly as they shift, the sound of nourishment making its way from market to table, and the air carries the mingled scents of herbs and bread, and sometimes the sharp attempts of onions or fish, smells drifting together with sound, so that the city is not only heard but tasted, not only seen but felt. And further away, from the blacksmith's corner, comes the echo of hammer against iron, steady, deliberate, each strike ringing out and then fading into the air, as if reminding all who hear that labor continues beyond their own. That strength is being shaped into tools, hinges, nails, the very bones of daily life, and though the clerk does not wield iron, the rhythm of that hammer seems kin to his own rhythm. Each letter struck carefully, each line bent into shape, the city itself held together by countless hands, shaping, carrying, striking, writing. Nothing here is urgent, nothing breaks the air with alarm, yet all is alive, each sound carrying its own weight, each neighbor adding their voice to the collective hum. And in this hum, the clerk's ear grows used to a backdrop that is less noise than texture, bells tolling the hour with solemn clarity, their sound rising high above rooftops and drifting down again into narrow lanes, marking time not with haste but with gentle authority, so that the day feels less like it is rushing away, and more like it is unfolding evenly, moment by moment, stroke by stroke, toll by toll, and footsteps pass on stone, sometimes hurried, sometimes wandering, their patterns as varied as the lives they belong to, yet always softened by the stone that has borne so many before. Footsteps that remind the clerk that life flows outside as it does inside, continuous, unbroken, the sound of presence more than passage, and often, woven through these steps, comes the cry of a fisherman announcing his catch, voice strong, carrying down alleys, rising above the quieter murmurs of conversation, his words less important than his tone, for even when one does not need fish, the sound reassures that the river still provides, that trade still moves, that the pattern of city life holds steady, and all of these sounds, from broom to bell to hammer to cry, do not compete but interlace, weaving a tapestry of quiet normalcy, so ordinary that it might be ignored, yet so constant that it grounds every day. And in this grounding the clerk finds rhythm, as steady as the tide, for though his work is inward, though his gaze bends over parchment and ink, though his hand moves with care across narrow lines, he is never separate from the world, never cut away from it, for the city speaks to him always, gently, persistently, reminding him that his labor is part of something larger, a harmony of motions and sounds that carry on whether seen or not. And when he pauses, lifting his head from the page, resting his hand for a moment, he can hear them more clearly, the sweeping, the calling, the tolling, the echoing, all combining into a single steady presence, and he feels, in those moments, that life is not only written but lived, not only inscribed on parchment but echoed on stone, not only preserved in texts but carried in footsteps and voices. And that thought brings him calm, for it reminds him that his own lines, his careful letters, are themselves another sound in the city's great chorus, quieter, perhaps, but enduring, another thread in the tapestry of the ordinary, which is, in its way, extraordinary. As dusk falls and the weight of the day begins to ease into gentler tones, the pace of work slows but does not cease. For even as shadows lengthen across the room and the lattice of the window admits only the last strands of fading light, the clerk prepares for the most delicate hours of his duty, lighting candles with a steady hand, their flames rising small at first, trembling against the draught, then settling into quiet pillars of glow, casting halos across the parchment and softening the room into an island of light within the wide ocean of evening. And it is here, in this glow, that the tasks of record take on a different kind of gravity, for the figures tallied in the day's accounts are now etched, not only with ink, but with the presence of flickering flame, shadows bending and leaning across the page as though the night itself wished to witness the marks, the tallies, the careful notes of deliveries and exchanges, the final stitching of the day's fabric before it is laid to rest. The clerk's hand, though perhaps wearied from the long labor of hours past, steadies itself with renewed calm, as if the very hush of evening lends it precision, and each numeral, each word, Each line placed on parchment feels not hurried, but considered, a sealing of the day's transactions, so that nothing slips into forgetfulness, so that what was given, what was received, what was promised, may endure beyond the fragile memory of the moment. Outside, the world darkens steadily, roofs falling into silhouette against the deepening sky, and with the descent of night, the louder hum of the city begins to soften into a hush. Carts that rattled in the afternoon now stilled, vendors' cries fading into silence, the footsteps fewer, slower, and the occasional bark of a dog or the closing of a door carrying further in the thinning air. Yet within the office, this quiet is not emptiness but companion, and the flicker of the candle becomes its own small voice, crackling faintly as wax pools and runs, marking the passing minutes as surely as any bell. The air itself shifts as the heat of day gives way to cooler breaths drifting through shutters, carrying with them the faint traces of hearth smoke from neighboring homes, the scent of evening meals prepared and shared, mingling with the smell of ink and tallow until the senses cannot tell which belongs more strongly to labor and which to rest. And in this mingling the clerk feels himself standing at a threshold between work and home, between duty and repose, his hand still tethered to parchment even as his thoughts wander gently toward the ease of his own table, his own bed, his own family voices awaiting him beyond these walls. Yet the ritual of evening records holds him firmly, not as burden but as rhythm, for to set down the day with care is to give it shape, to let no part of it dissolve into vagueness, and in that act there is satisfaction, the kind that comes not with grand gestures but with small completions. And as the candlelight steadies the ink, and his quill moves in soft strokes, the clerk feels a kinship with countless others who, in their own ways, also draw the day to a close, the mother folding linens, the craftsman storing his tools, the merchant locking his chest, the farmer leading his beasts into stalls, all finding in their evening gestures a sense of closure, of readiness for rest. The city, though quieter, is not asleep. Its heart still beats, but slowly, with the evenness of breath in slumber. And through the window the occasional toll of a distant bell drifts across the rooftops, not calling to labor now, but marking the passage of time with a voice softened by darkness. And in its sound the clerk hears reassurance that even as his candle burns low, even as his page fills, he is moving with the city, not apart from it. The candle throws his shadow large against the wall, a silhouette bent over the desk, and in that shadow he sees something timeless, as though clerks before him and clerks after will look much the same. The figure of a man in quiet service, shaping the memory of a day so it may live into tomorrow. And though his eyes tire and the flame gutters when the draught presses too strong, he continues, line after line, number after number, word after word, until the page reflects the fullness of all that has passed, until the day is no longer fleeting, but held, and only then does he pause, laying the quill aside, watching the ink dry under the glow of wax and wick, breathing in the cooler air that signals the city has settled deeper into its night. Soon work will end, and home will beckon, the promise of rest warm against the weariness of his hand. Yet for these moments, the candlelit desk is its own kind of hearth, the parchment its own fire, and the quiet his own company, and he knows, as he closes the ledger at last, that he has given the day its order, its completion, its place in the long chain of days, steady and unbroken, as constant as the tide, and as gentle as the flame that now begins to bend low, signaling the hour has come to rise, to extinguish the light, and to step from the office into the night that waits beyond. Evening meals are shared quietly with family, and though the fare is simple, its simplicity carries the weight of familiarity, of ritual, of the steady rhythm that binds one day to the next. For when the clerk returns from his office, leaving behind the candlelit desk and its quiet labors, he steps into the threshold of his home, where the scent of supper already drifts through the air, warm and earthy, stewed lentils simmering slowly, coarse bread resting upon the wooden board, perhaps a small dish of pickled vegetables set carefully at the side, their sharpness offering contrast to the mild heartiness of the beans. And though no lavish feast adorns the table, the meal feels whole, sufficient, and even generous in its modesty. The hearth glows, a steady flame within the room, its light not as clear as the candle he left behind at work, but warmer, broader, softer, filling corners with a kind of golden comfort that blurs edges and makes the space itself feel like an embrace. Here, In this circle of warmth, the family gathers, their faces touched by the firelight, their bodies easing into rest as the weariness of the day finally begins to loosen its grip. The children, younger and drowsy from the long hours of play and small tasks, settle beside their elders, listening with heavy-lidded eyes to stories told in quiet voices, perhaps a tale from memory, perhaps a lesson wrapped in humor, perhaps simply a recollection of something seen on the street earlier that day, and, though the words may not always linger in their minds by morning, the rhythm of the voices, the cadence of shared presence, plants within them a sense of belonging, of continuity, of being part of something larger than themselves. The laughter that arises during supper is subdued, not the boisterous kind of festival or holiday, but a softer mirth, shaped by fatigue, colored by tenderness, the small chuckles of parents teasing, the giggle of a child at a remembered slip or misstep, and beneath it all the quiet hum of gratitude that, though unspoken, threads through the room, for food upon the table, for shelter from the cool night air, for company that eases the solitude each might otherwise feel. Supper is not a feast, but a pause, a gentle conclusion to the workday, an interlude in which no great demands press upon the mind, no weighty tasks insist upon completion, and instead the senses are allowed to slow, the taste of lentils upon the tongue, the crust of bread broken by hand, the tang of pickled vegetables sparking faintly, the sound of a log shifting in the hearth, the sight of faces softened by firelight, each detail weaving together into a tapestry of evening that comforts more deeply than abundance ever could. And as the clerk eats, his shoulders relaxing after hours of straight-backed diligence, he feels the subtle shift within himself from duty to rest, from the precision of figures to the openness of presence, from the quill scratching across parchment to the spoon lifted slowly from bowl to lips. And in that shift there is restoration. The home itself seems to breathe differently than the office. Its air is scented not with ink and wax, but with herbs and smoke. Its sounds not the silence of concentration, but the mingling of voices, the faint stir of children, the clatter of utensils, the occasional bark of a dog in the distance, softened by walls that now hold intimacy instead of industry. Each member of the household partakes not only of the food, but of the moment, contributing something small, a word, a smile, a gesture of passing bread, or pouring drink until the table becomes more than a surface. It becomes the center of shared being, a circle within which the day is closed. The fire burns lower as the meal continues, embers deepening into a red glow, casting long shadows across the floor, and with that dimming light comes the gentle reminder that the night presses on, that soon the children must be led to their beds, that soon the parents must tidy what remains, setting aside bowls, wiping the table, leaving the room in quiet readiness for the next day's cycle. Yet for this span of time, before dispersal, before rest, they linger in the warmth, speaking not urgently but with the ease that comes when nothing more must be done. In these moments the clerk feels the balance of his life most clearly, the day structured by labor, the evening softened by family, the whole supported by simple meals like this, meals that ask for little but give much in return. Outside, the city may still murmur faintly, an occasional cart creaking by, the distant call of someone delayed, the faint clang of a closing gate, but those sounds fade quickly into the background, muffled by walls and fire and presence. And what remains strongest is the steady rhythm of domesticity, the secure knowledge that tomorrow will bring its labors, and tomorrow will bring another supper, different yet the same. And in this continuity life finds its steadiness. Supper at home, though humble, though quiet, though free of extravagance, is in truth the anchor of the day, the point to which all paths return, the pause that steadies the heart before the long silence of night. And in this pause the family breathes together, bound not by grand declarations, but by the ordinary beauty of bread, of lentils, of warmth, of shared presence, of rest earned and received with gratitude. The household itself is modest, yet within its modesty lies the essence of a life both secure and enduring. For when one steps into such a dwelling, it is not grandeur or ornament that commands attention, but the quiet rhythm of things familiar, the unassuming harmony of a space arranged not to impress but to sustain. And though the walls are only of plaster, their whiteness softened by time, and though the beams of wood above creak faintly as the evening air cools, the house holds itself with dignity, for it shelters, it encloses. It provides the steady frame against which daily life unfolds, and the floor, swept clean of dust by careful hands, speaks of diligence, of pride, of the small but meaningful effort that turns simplicity into comfort. In corners, small oil lamps burn, their flames flickering steadily, giving just enough light for movement, enough glow for recognition of faces, of gestures, of objects placed where memory expects them. And though the light is dim compared to the sun, it has its own intimacy, for it does not banish the shadows, but softens them. It does not overwhelm the eyes, but rests them, allowing the room to remain partly veiled, partly revealed, a place half in light, half in quiet. From pegs along the walls hang textiles, woven with simple patterns, not intricate or rare, but with colors that bring warmth into the space-faded reds, soft blues, earthy browns, the tones of dyes drawn from plants and roots and crafted with patience. And these cloths, though modest, speak of care, of artistry, turned toward daily use, of beauty that does not shout, but lingers gently in the background, shaping the mood of the room without insisting upon itself. Here, comfort does not come from wealth, nor from luxury, but from familiarity, from the way the sound of a door closing carries reassurance, telling those within that the world outside has been set apart for now, that within these walls they are enclosed, safe, at rest. The blankets, though coarse in weave, carry warmth enough to ward off the night, their weight upon the body steadying, anchoring, whispering of security, of shelter, of the body's need met with what is at hand. And in that meeting, contentment is found, for comfort, in truth, is less the abundance of possessions than the knowledge that one belongs somewhere, that there is a place in which to sit, to lie down, to eat, to rest. And in this household the reassurance of safe shelter is felt in every gesture, in every corner, in every softly glowing lamp. The hearth does not blaze, but burns steadily, its coals maintaining heat enough to carry the family into the late hours. And as shadows lengthen, the house seems to draw itself closer, its walls holding in warmth, its beams lowering their silent watch, the very air shifting into the stillness of night. A stool by the wall, worn smooth by years of use, feels shaped not only by the hands that carved it, but by the countless times someone has rested upon it, its surface holding memory as much as form. A chest by the corner contains garments folded neatly, the fabric smelling faintly of earth and air, of soap and smoke, each piece both practical covering and silent witness to the cycles of labor and rest. Domestic comfort, in this sense, is not static but alive, woven into the fabric of daily movements, the sweeping of the floor, the trimming of the lampwick, the careful folding of cloth, the closing of shutters against the cool night air, and each act, repeated endlessly, builds familiarity until the very performance of these tasks becomes itself a source of reassurance, proof that life continues, that the household remains steady despite the passing of days. The house does not need luxury to feel whole. Its modesty is not a lack, but a presence of something subtler, stability, constancy, a rhythm that carries one through. To sit within such a dwelling as night settles is to feel how space and life mirror one another, the walls enclosing like arms, the lamps glowing like watchful eyes, the floor clean beneath one's feet like ground freshly cleared for rest. Outside, the world may carry uncertainties, noises, even threats, but within, the comfort of the familiar resists them, builds a shield of habit and affection against intrusion. One hears the small creaks of wood as beams settle, the faint flutter of flame as a lamp flickers, the sigh of fabric as someone adjusts a blanket. And in these sounds lies assurance, for they are known sounds, expected, part of the tapestry of domestic life, and to hear them is to know one is not adrift, but anchored. The modest house, with its plaster, its beams, its textiles, its lamps, is not merely a physical shelter, but a spiritual one, shaping not only the body's rest, but the heart's peace, offering a space where weariness can dissolve into familiarity, where the day's demands can be laid aside without fear of being lost. In such a place, even silence becomes a comfort, for it is not empty silence but filled silence, silence shaped by presence, by walls holding firm, by lamps glowing faintly, by blankets folded upon a chest, by voices having ceased only because rest has begun. Comfort, simple and domestic, is thus not measured by grandeur but by the way a home can whisper, "You are safe, you are here, you are held." By night, Constantinople falls into near silence, a silence not of emptiness but of suspension, as though the vast city, with all its markets, docks, palaces, and houses, has taken a single, collective breath and now holds it softly, resting. In the embrace of darkness, the moon glints off tiled roofs, lending the machine that in daylight would go unnoticed, turning common clay and stone into silver plains. Cats slink along the narrow alleys, their eyes catching glimmers of light. As they move with a confidence born of long dominion over these spaces, from the distance comes the low murmur of the sea, the Bosporus breathing against its shores with tireless rhythm, the faint wash of water against stone sounding like a heartbeat beneath the city's dreams. Only the occasional watchman passes through, his footsteps deliberate, echoing against the stillness of walls and pavement, his torch casting a wavering glow that both affirms his presence and deepens the shadows beyond. The clerk, having set aside the labors of the day, may stand for a brief moment at his doorway, breathing in the cool night air that drifts like balm across his face, before retreating inside to the reassurance of lamplight and rest. For though Constantinople is vast, with districts stretching from the Golden Horn to the great walls that touch the sea, at night it seems smaller, more intimate, as if wrapped in a hush that soothes the mind and folds the body gently towards sleep. The streets, so alive by day with traders crying their wares, with carts rattling over stone, with the mingled smells of spice, bread, fish, and sweat, now lie emptied, their stones holding only the memory of passage. The sound of hooves is absent, the bustle of voices gone, leaving only the occasional creak of wood as shutters adjust in the breeze, or the faint scurry of mice exploring unattended corners. Lamps in wealthier quarters still burn, set within niches along walls or fixed to doorposts, their flames faintly trembling in the night air. But most streets are lit only by the moon and stars, casting an uneven glow that leaves some alleys in deep shadow and others washed pale with light. It is in these hours that the city shows a different face, a quieter and more contemplative one, where even the grandest monuments seem hushed. The Hagia Sophia, which by day dominates the skyline with its domes and arches, now rests in shadowed dignity, its vast form softened by night, its outlines blurred until it seems more dream than stone. For the clerk, who has spent the day surrounded by parchment, by tallies, by voices negotiating goods, this quiet offers a reprieve, to step outside and feel the cool stone beneath his sandals, to inhale the salt-tinged air drifting from the sea. To watch a cat pause at a crossroads before vanishing into darkness is to feel himself part of a city that breathes, not only in noise but also in stillness. The watchman's torch passes now and then, the flame swaying as he moves, his presence both protective and remote. For he is not there to converse but to guard, not to join but to patrol. His footsteps fade, and with them the sound returns to silence, as though the city swallows up what little movement disturbs it. Yet the silence of Constantinople is never absolute. There are always undertones, the steady sigh of waves against the sea walls, the creak of rigging from ships moored in the harbor, the faint bark of a dog somewhere far off, perhaps roused by a stray or by some unseen movement. These sounds do not disturb the quiet but enrich it, give it depth, remind the listener that life continues in threads, even when the great tapestry rests. The city never dies, but it slumbers, and in that slumber it reveals textures hidden by the brilliance of day. Walking through such streets at night, one might notice details overlooked in the bustle of daytime, the worn grooves in the stones where countless wheels have passed, the moss that clings to shaded corners, the faint outlines of inscriptions carved into walls, now half erased by weather and time. One might notice how sound carries differently, footsteps ringing sharper, voices echoing farther, as if the city itself has become a chamber, amplifying every noise against the backdrop of silence. The moonlight falls unevenly, sometimes caught on the curve of a tiled roof, sometimes pouring into a courtyard, sometimes leaving entire stretches of street in darkness so deep they appear as passageways into another world. For the one who stands and listens, the city's immensity contracts into a space both near and familiar, a place of intimacy where every corner feels known, where even shadows seem like companions rather than threats. The clerk, pausing at his doorway, breathes this in. His shoulders, bent with the posture of writing, lift slightly as the night air fills his chest. His ears catch the faintest sounds: water, wind, a shifting shutter, and he feels the day's burdens lift inside. The lamp awaits, the bed, the quiet warmth of blankets. But for this brief interval he lingers, savoring the way the city seems to whisper without words, the way it seems to draw around itself a cloak of rest. To live in Constantinople is to live within a vast engine of commerce, of faith, of politics. But to live there at night is to live within a cradle of stillness, where the immensity of empire collapses into the simple rhythm of breathing air and hearing water move. Even the animals of the city adjust to this rhythm. The cats prowl with a sovereignty that daytime cannot grant them, slipping through alleys, balancing along walls, their movements so fluid they seem part of the night itself. Dogs lie curled against doorways, half asleep, half alert, raising their heads only when footsteps pass. Birds that filled the sky with motion by day now tuck themselves into niches and eaves, their silence blending with that of the streets. The city, alive still with countless unseen lives, shows them now as threads within the night's tapestry, each movement small, each sound delicate, yet together forming the texture of nocturnal existence. For those rare few still abroad at this hour, perhaps a sailor late returning to his lodgings, or a baker beginning early preparations for dawn, the streets are a different landscape, less a place of business and more a passage through stillness. Their footsteps mark them clearly, and each movement becomes significant, visible against the quiet. The clerk, watching, might reflect on how strange it is that the same stones which hours before rang with chaos now carry only one set of feet at a time, how the same air that smelled of spices and sweat now carries only the faintest trace of salt and smoke. This rhythm of night and day shapes the city's soul as much as its walls or markets. The hush of night is as essential as the clamor of morning, for without pause, without the stillness into which the city sinks, it could not rise again with energy. The quiet streets, in their silence, perform a kind of restoration, allowing both place and people to reset. And so, while the moon glints on tiles and the sea whispers along the shore, while cats slip like shadows and the watchman walks his lonely path, the city gathers itself, conserving strength for what the morning will demand. To dwell in such a city is to know both its vastness and its intimacy, its noise and its quiet, its grandeur and its modesty. And for the clerk, standing one last moment before closing his door, this is the comfort of Constantinople at night, that even amid stone, empire, and endless tasks, there is a time when everything rests, when the world itself feels smaller, calmer, softer, wrapped in a hush that soothes not only the streets but the heart. The day closes with rest. The clerk lies upon a straw mattress, wrapped in a woolen blanket. The quiet fills the chamber save for the distant toll of a bell marking the late hour. Sleep drifts slowly, carrying with it images of ledgers, of ink stains, of sunlit courtyards. Dreams are simple, yet restful, reflecting the ordinary cares and gentle routines of a life both humble and steady. Night within Constantinople has its own rhythm, different from the bustling daylight hours, yet equally profound in shaping the texture of life. For the clerk, rest is not merely the absence of work, it is a necessary balance, the other half of the cycle that allows the following morning to arrive with purpose. He stretches once, feeling the stiffness of his arms that have bent over parchment all day, and then lets the weight of sleep press against his body. His chamber is modest, a single lamp extinguished before lying down, a small window shuttered against the cool air, and the faint smell of oil lingering from the evening's meal. Yet, in its simplicity, it offers security. The walls hold back the night, and the night, in turn, grants him silence. Dreams come softly, unannounced, weaving the material of the day into images, both strange and familiar. He dreams of ink flowing endlessly, not from a pot but from a fountain in a courtyard, black streams that sparkle like water in sunlight. He sees figures from his ledgers rise and walk, numbers turning into people who greet him with nods, as if to confirm their accuracy. There is no fear in these dreams, only a curious blending of labor and imagination. His life is steady, and so his dreams, too, carry steadiness. They do not disturb him but wrap him in continuity, a gentle echo of waking hours. Sleep itself, in the ancient city, is shaped by sound. Though the streets grow quiet, they are never silent. The distant bark of a dog, the creak of a wooden cart rolling late, or the faint murmur of waves against the harbor walls all seep through the night air. These sounds mingle with his breathing, steady and rhythmic. In moments between dreaming, when he drifts closer to waking, he is aware of them and comforted. The world outside continues. He rests within it, a part of its ongoing life. The straw mattress beneath him shifts with his weight, not luxurious but sufficient. He has grown used to its unevenness, just as he has grown used to the ink stains on his fingertips and the hard crust of yesterday's bread at breakfast. Familiarity breeds comfort. He pulls the wool blanket higher, feeling it scratch against his chin, a reminder that warmth is a gift not every household enjoys as fully. The hearth in the main room has long since cooled, and the night air carries a bite that makes the blanket all the more cherished. In the household around him, others rest too. Children murmur in their sleep, turning in their own small beds of straw. A parent coughs lightly, then settles. Silence is shared, yet alive, with the presence of family. The clerk knows that, though each member dreams separately, they are united by walls, by roof, by the shared experience of night. This domestic rhythm assures him that when he wakes, he will not be alone. Continuity is comfort. As his dreams deepen, they shift in form. He finds himself walking through courtyards lit, not by the sun but by stars, parchment floating like leaves around him. He reaches out, but the leaves drift just beyond his grasp, moving with a breeze he cannot feel. In another dream, he is at his desk, quill in hand, yet the ink turns to gold upon the parchment, each letter glowing with light. He marvels at it, even as sleep folds him deeper into its embrace. These dreams carry neither ambition nor fear. They carry wonder. Rest is sacred in its own way. The city's power, its wealth, its empire, all of it depends on countless individuals like him being able to rise each day and repeat their quiet labors. Without rest, ink would blur, numbers would falter, and records would crumble. The empire is preserved not only by emperors and generals, but by clerks who dream in straw beds, who allow themselves to pause so that continuity may continue. The clerk does not think of this directly, yet it is true all the same. In his sleep lies the strength of tomorrow's work. Hours pass unnoticed. The moon arcs across the sky, its light filtering faintly through the shuttered window. Silver beams slipping between cracks in the wood. Shadows shift in the chamber, unseen by his closed eyes. Time moves with patience, the same patience he carries in his waking hours. Outside, watchmen call out the changing of shifts, their voices distant but steady. Bells toll again, softer in the depth of night, a reminder that time marches even in stillness. At moments, the clerk stirs. A dream unsettles him, slightly, a ledger he cannot balance, a page that tears before his eyes. Yet even these anxieties soften, for they are familiar worries. He sighs, shifts position, and allows the blanket to settle once more. Sleep claims him again quickly. His body, weary from the day's precision, refuses to cling long to unrest. Toward the late hours, his dreams turn gentler still. He sees his family gathered in sunlight, children laughing as birds scatter in a courtyard. He hears the steady rush of the sea, though in the dream it flows not against a shore but through city streets, carrying no destruction, only cool relief. The images are simple, like his life. They leave him with calm rather than longing. Sleep also renews. Muscles unknot, breath deepens, thoughts slow. In the silence of his chamber, with the faint perfume of wool and straw about him, the clerk is remade for another day. His rest is not idleness, but quiet preparation, a hidden labor that restores what daylight takes. In this way, sleep becomes as essential as the ink he uses, as vital as the bread he eats, as grounding as the stones of the streets he walks. Dreams weave through the hours, carrying fragments of memory, the shape of a fountain, the laughter of children, the flicker of candlelight upon parchment. Each detail is lifted from waking life and reshaped into images that hold no strict order. Yet when he wakes, he will carry their calm with him. Even if forgotten, their influence remains. They soothe the heart, they ease the mind, they prepare him for the rhythm to come. Dawn creeps closer. The city stirs faintly, though within the chamber, sleep still holds him fast. The bell that will announce morning has not yet rung. The clerk breathes evenly, wrapped in his blanket, dreams continuing in silence. His day is not yet begun, but in this rest, the foundation of it is already laid. The night, in its quiet generosity, gives him strength, and the dreams, in their simplicity, give him peace. Thus, the day closes with rest and dreams, and in this closure lies the quiet miracle of ordinary life, the balance of labor and pause, of ink and sleep, of waking and dreaming. The clerk may not think of his nights as remarkable, yet without them, no record would be kept, no ledger maintained, no continuity assured. His rest, humble though it is, sustains not only himself, but the life of an empire. And so he sleeps on, wrapped in wool, upon straw, while Constantinople itself dreams under the watchful gaze of moon and stars. History, when spoken of in grand terms, often revolves around emperors, generals, and kings. It speaks of battles that shook kingdoms, of decrees that altered the lives of thousands, of monuments that pierced the sky and stood as reminders of glory. Yet beneath this surface lies a quieter, steadier current. The Byzantine Empire, vast, complex, enduring for centuries, was not only held together by its armies and rulers, but also by men and women whose names rarely appear in chronicles. Among them were clerks, scribes, traders, bakers, artisans, and countless laborers. They formed the true heartbeat of the empire, sustaining it not with conquest, but with the ordinary continuity of daily life. The clerk's life, when placed against the backdrop of the empire's might, seems unremarkable at first glance. He rose in the morning, walked through stone-paved streets, recorded entries in ledgers, copied texts, shared meals, and retired each night to a modest home. But when observed closely, his quiet existence reveals the enduring rhythms that allowed an empire to survive storms, wars, and transitions. These lives, steady as the ticking of a clock, stitched together the immense fabric of Byzantium. To understand the endurance of ordinary lives is to understand that history is not built solely on sudden upheavals, but on continuities, on habits repeated day after day. The clerk's careful writing, his devotion to precise records, his habit of pausing to admire the courtyard vines or listen to neighbors' voices, was part of this continuity. His life was not punctuated by extraordinary drama, yet it was essential in preserving the empire's internal order. A misplaced number, an unclear record, or an error in copied prayer could ripple outward, confusing taxes, disrupting shipments, or marring liturgical recitations. Thus, the quiet discipline of clerks carried weight, even if unnoticed. Ordinary lives, like his, also carried with them the solace of familiarity. The empire itself endured for more than 1,000 years, in part because its people found strength in repetition. Just as a household was warmed nightly by the same fire, so too was the empire bound together by the predictability of daily actions. Farmers sowed seeds each spring, bakers kneaded loaves each dawn, merchants opened stalls in marketplaces, and clerks dipped quills into ink. All of these tasks may appear small, but multiplied across generations, they became the foundation of resilience. There is beauty in this quietness. In a world where much attention is given to upheaval, conquest, and collapse, the unchanging pace of daily life reminds us that most of humanity's story is not written in dramatic flourishes, but in steady lines. The clerk's careful hand across parchment mirrors this truth. Not flamboyant, not hurried, but measured, deliberate, and lasting. The enduring quiet of ordinary lives also reflects a kind of humility. These men and women did not live with the expectation that their deeds would echo in chronicles. Their reward was not glory, but stability. The knowledge that their work kept bread on the table, kept records in order, kept families safe beneath simple roofs. For the clerk, pride rested in clean handwriting, in orderly scrolls stacked neatly, in the sense that the empire's vastness was, in some small way, made legible through his pen. Evenings, when families gathered for modest meals, showed another form of endurance. Conversations repeated across countless households, discussions of food prices, the weather, children's growth were not dramatic, but they were the threads of community. The empire endured not only through armies guarding its frontiers, but through the intimacy of supper tables, where families reminded themselves that life was worth living in its ordinary form. Laughter, though subdued, echoed through small homes, blending with the crackle of hearths. These moments rarely found their way into history, yet they preserved morale, ensuring that life continued even in the face of uncertainty. Dreams, too, played their part in endurance. As clerks lay upon straw mattresses, listening to the faint tolling of bells or the hush of night, they carried with them hopes not of grandeur but of steadiness. that their children would grow strong, that tomorrow would mirror today in safety, that work would remain predictable. Such dreams may seem humble, but they form the backbone of continuity. An empire survives not only by conquering new lands, but by maintaining the faith of its people in ordinary stability. One might ask, why celebrate such quiet lives? Because in them lies the hidden strength of civilizations. An emperor may win a battle, but if bakers fail to supply bread, soldiers starve. A general may conquer cities, but if clerks fail to record taxes, the treasury empties. An architect may design a magnificent church, but if artisans fail to lay stones correctly, it collapses. In this sense, ordinary lives are not secondary, they are central. They provide the soil in which history grows, even if the chronicles rarely acknowledge them. For the clerk, there was also a quiet spirituality in his labor, copying sacred texts, aligning prayers with precision, or ensuring that a sermon's words would endure beyond the moment of speech. All of these tasks were acts of devotion. Each careful stroke of the quill was not only administrative but spiritual, a recognition that order itself was sacred. In Byzantium, where faith saturated daily life, the blending of work and devotion allowed ordinary labor to become a form of prayer. The city itself reflected this endurance. Streets that bustled with vendors in the morning grew hushed at night. Courtyards glowed with afternoon light. Bells marked the passage of time. These rhythms did not change dramatically across decades. Children who once played near fountains grew into adults who repeated the same walks, the same meals, the same habits. Generations passed, yet the city's heartbeat remained familiar. In this constancy lay comfort. When history remembers Byzantium, it often highlights its longevity, an empire that lasted for more than a millennium. This longevity was not secured solely by emperor's brilliance, but by the quiet loyalty of its ordinary citizens. Each clerk who copied records, each farmer who sowed wheat, each mother who lit a lamp at dusk, contributed to this unseen strength. Their names may be lost, but their endurance ensured the empire's survival. The enduring quiet of ordinary lives thus teaches a lesson about perspective. What seems small in the present may, over centuries, prove monumental. A single day's record in a ledger may appear trivial, but accumulated over decades, it becomes the continuity of governance. A single meal shared around a table may seem fleeting, but repeated night after night, it becomes the rhythm of family, anchoring generations. For the clerk himself, this truth might never be fully realized. He may never consider his life significant in the grand scheme, but history's silence about him does not erase his importance. Rather, it reminds us that greatness often hides in plain sight, tin-clean parchment, in simple homes, in voices echoing through narrow streets. As night falls once more and the clerk retires to his straw mattress, the city around him breathes. In steady quiet, watchmen pace, cats slink through alleys, the sea whispers in the distance. Tomorrow will bring the same tasks, walking through stone streets, dipping quills into ink, recording figures, pausing for meals, and returning home. Yet within this sameness lies something profound, the endurance of ordinary life. It is this endurance that holds empires together, that gives history its continuity, that offers comfort to those who live within it. In the end, when we reflect on the Byzantine Empire, we may recall emperors, wars, and monuments, but perhaps the truer measure of its strength lies in the countless clerks who wrote by candlelight, the families who shared lentils and bread, the neighbors whose footsteps echoed through streets at dusk. Their lives, unremarkable on the surface, formed the quiet scaffolding upon which history rested. And so the days continued unmarked by spectacle, yet rich in steady purpose. The empire, immense and powerful, was carried forward not only by ambition and conquest, but by the enduring quiet of ordinary lives. As the night deepens, we leave behind the gentle world of the Byzantine clerk. His life was not filled with grand triumphs or heavy burdens, but with a quiet rhythm of ink upon parchment, bread shared at humble tables, and the steady glow of lanterns in narrow streets. In these small details lies a deeper truth that history is shaped not only by emperors and generals, but also by the steady hands of those who lived simply, preserving the flow of life through their ordinary duties. The story of this clerk is not a tale of conquest or revolution, but of persistence. Each day, he walked the same path to his office, lifted the same quill, bent over the same parchment, and recorded details that, in their moment, may have seemed unremarkable. Yet centuries later, those records, those letters, traced in patient strokes, are what allow us to glimpse the heart of his world. His life was quiet, yes, but it was also enduring. Imagine the stillness of Constantinople at night, the city that once called itself the New Rome, wrapped now in silence. The clerk's footsteps echo faintly as he steps out to breathe in the cool air. The streets are empty, save for the faint patrol of a watchman or the shadow of a stray cat slinking along a wall. Above him, the moonlight casts a silver wash over tiled roofs, and the distant sea murmurs softly against the harbor. It is in these moments between duty and rest, between the end of one day and the beginning of the next, that his existence feels most timeless. We often think of history as grand and loud, of trumpets announcing victory, of armies clashing on distant plains, of emperors issuing decrees from thrones of gold. But history is also this: a man sitting at a desk, dipping a quill into ink, and writing carefully by candlelight while the world outside drifts into sleep. Without him and others like him, the empire would have been chaos. Without records, decrees would vanish into air, taxes would dissolve into rumor, and the memory of generations would fade like smoke. His work was invisible, but it was indispensable. There is beauty in such invisibility. To live a life not in pursuit of glory, but in service to order and continuity, is to weave quietly into the fabric of something far greater than oneself. The clerk's devotion was not measured in battles fought or monuments raised, but in the simple faith that each line of ink mattered, that the world was held together, not by spectacle, but by constancy. Think of the modest suppers he shared at home. Lentils simmered slowly, bread passed around the table, children drifting to sleep by the warmth of the hearth. These are not moments that appear in chronicles of kings, yet they are the essence of endurance. For what sustains an empire, if not the countless homes where food is shared, where laughter is soft, where comfort is found in routine rather than excess? And so, as we leave the clerk's world, we are invited to reflect on our own. Modern life often chases after spectacle, the loud, the new, the urgent. Yet the lesson of the Byzantine clerk is that permanence lies in the ordinary. The empire he served eventually fell. Its palaces crumbled, its rulers faded into memory. But the rhythm of daily life, the meals, the prayers, the work at a desk, the quiet moments of reflection, these are patterns that persist across centuries, binding us to those who came before. In the hush of night, picture again the candlelight, flickering upon parchment. Picture the clerk pausing, stretching his fingers after a long day, gazing at the neat lines he has written. In his mind, there is no thought of future historians, no dream of being remembered. He writes because it is his duty, his craft, and his offering. Yet unknowingly, he becomes a thread in the vast tapestry of human history. The deeper truth here is simple. Greatness is not always about standing in the spotlight. Sometimes it is about keeping the flame steady while others shine brightly and fade. The Byzantine Empire's legacy was not carried only by its emperors, but also by its clerks, merchants, artisans, and families, ordinary people whose steady lives gave shape to a civilization. And so, as you rest now, imagine the faint crackle of a hearth, the scent of wax and parchment, the hush of distant bells marking the hour. Let these images soften the mind, carrying you toward calm dreams. Remember that history is not only a story of thunder and storms, but also of gentle rains. The empire may fade, but the peace of such moments lingers timeless, gentle, and enduring. The clerk lays down his quill, extinguishes his candle, and pulls his blanket close. His day is done. The city outside is wrapped in quiet, the sea whispering its lullaby. Tomorrow, he will rise again to repeat the same rhythm. But for tonight, there is only rest, only dreams, only the profound simplicity of a life that may be forgotten by name, yet never lost in meaning. In the silence of night, the lesson is clear. Empires are built on ordinary lives, and within the ordinary lies the eternal,